All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining me today for Lesson 4 Q&A. And it's great to have you all with us. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the microclimate assignment as well as mapping current zones. And we'll take some questions regarding that. And we'll look at some other items if we have time. Share a few photos of a project, little urban project I'm involved with if we've got if we have time today. But again, really appreciate everybody making time to attend. So without further ado, maybe what I'll do, I'll just share screen here. All right. Excellent. All right, so here we are at lesson 4. And as you all know, we're taking a look at a couple of items today, and you can see that they are worth the same value. We have 10 points each for both of these portions of the assignment. And mainly because both are equally as important. So we're looking at microclimates within your project site. And we're also looking at mapping the current zones as best you can on that project site. So I guess what we'll do is we'll start with microclimates. And on the discussion board here, there's quite a good overview of that. We're looking at, I guess last week we were looking at sectors. So we're looking at outside influences that affect the project site. But this week or this lesson, we are looking at some of those microclimates that are found within the project site. So these are very interesting. And again, part of the big picture when we are looking at site analysis, and an important thing to dial into for sure. So let's take a look at some of the examples that we've been asked to take a peek at. So the major microclimates, they're going to relate to sun and wind and moisture and any other major influences on the site. So that's obviously when we're talking about sun, we're also talking about shade. We could be talking about an area where the shade is it's dry shade, or it could be moist shade. So if you're able to, that is a good thing to really dial into. Open and sunny, shaded, moist, windy, exposed. These are all, sort of keywords that we'd want to consider when we're putting this together. And we also want to identify 5 different plants that are on the site. And if possible, and not every site's going to have this, but if possible, we want to have at least 1 tree and 1 shrub. And that in itself, we want to get a little bit in depth. We want to have the the genus and species, the common name, which is funny. Through my training, I am completely used to botanical Latin, and then when we get to common names, that's a challenge for me. So just the way I learned, and this is a good example here too, where we're looking at a grand fir, the Abies grandis, and if you pointed to it and said that's a fir, well, that doesn't really help us. It gets us close. So I'd encourage everybody to really embrace botanical Latin. I probably spent 10 years studying plants pretty heavily when I was starting out, and it's definitely helped throughout my career, knowing that I've got a fairly good base of plants to draw on. Now, with the plants, we also want to encourage everybody to research those. So with that, we want to see some of the sources that you've used. And way back when I was starting my apprenticeship, you know, there was, believe it or not, there was no internet, which is hard to imagine. So the way I learned was just through books. The more books you had in your library, the better off you were in that sense. That was sort of, you know, that was a really pivotal part of learning. Now we have these incredible resources online, so books are a little bit less in terms of importance, but yeah, many really good resources. So I'd encourage everybody to take this seriously, this part of the assignment. And of course, again, we want to look at those attributes within the microclimate. So let's take a look at an example here that I should also bring up. The template file, just so we can reference that. And again, that is a great reference as you're putting this together. There's a lot of instructions as well as tutorials built into the template, which does help to streamline it quite a bit. So you can see on the first page here, we're asking everybody to place their base map, and you're going to be overlaying onto that with your microclimates. So if we go back to our assessment, well, we'll go back to that discussion board and we take a look at the rubric here. You want to definitely check in with this and make sure you're covering all these things off as you're assembling it, because this rubric is primarily what I use to provide grades for you guys. So definitely encourage that. And then we will talk about the zones here in a minute, but let us take a look at one example. So in this example, the student has their base plan and they have a north up and a scale. They also have their name and they also have the date. So those are important items to place in here. Now, having this little portion of the title block is a really nice touch, giving the coordinates, the dimensions, the area, and the elevation. And in this case, that should be 24 meters because everything else is in metric. Well, the dimensions are in metric, so not not vital, but it's a good idea to get this as clear as possible. And then you can see these different microclimates that have been established here. So the student has also listed 7 plants. Didn't need to do that, but they did. And they ended up, this kind of a clever way of putting it together, where you have a plant and then you have the area, a description of the area, and then what that microclimate is. So we have full sun and hot, we have partial, cool, moist, or mostly moist, full sun, warm, medium to wet. So, which of course is different than hot and dry, and full sun and shade. So you could almost call that partial shade. There's lots of terms you could use there, but some of these other descriptions are important. So cool, mostly moist, and sort of full sun, hot and dry. So you could say, well, number 6 and number 1 look pretty similar, which they do. And those could have been one microclimate. And then we get to full to dappled sun, warm, dry to medium, and I would imagine that's medium moisture. So this is well done. We want the whole base plan covered with microclimates. So, you know, technically there are little spaces here, but this, you know, that is most likely a limitation with regards to the software you're using. It's hard to have these match up completely. So this looks great, and this is the sort of thing we're after. And then in the second portion of this assignment, we're listing each plant and a little bit about them, what their preferred habitat is, and the microclimate they're in, and then their uses and their ecological function. So it's a great exercise to go through, and it would be, you know, it's very interesting to go through this just to see how well, well, it's really about building knowledge about these specific plants and what the habitat they like, where you might be able to use them within a design if you were intentionally placing them there. So that is that. I believe we carry on to the second page because there were 7 plants. Now 5 is great. If you want to include more, you're quite welcome to do so. Then a sample of existing species that are here. And in a lot of ways, that's very similar to what we do with our design work. We are looking at, when we're looking at an existing site and we're in that site analysis phase, we're documenting significant trees and shrubs, and we're also taking a look at any herbaceous or ground cover plants that are there. We don't mark those on a drawing, but we do make note of them for reuse. And you know what I'm going to do here? I'll just show you what an example of what we do in that regards, because in some projects there'll only be a few existing plants, but in others there may be quite a number. And that does make life a little bit trickier. Sorry about the delay here. Let me just pull up. Just trying to find. Yeah, sorry about this. I'm just, well, maybe this will do. No, that one won't do. We'll see what this is like. Not quite. Okay. We'll find one here. Aha, there we go. So I'm gonna just share this instead. So this is a little urban project we did. And I'll try and make it a little bigger here so you can see. Well, it's been uncooperative with the Zoom. Okay. Well, I think we'll be able to see enough here, hopefully. But what we do, so on this project, this is the base plan that we put together. And then we overlaid this with existing plants. And typically what we do is we will label the plant, and you'll see there's a little code at the front. In this case, it's ES, so existing shrub, and we give it a number. Excuse me. Oh. So we give it a number, and then we're going to give it an action. So this is a rhododendron, and this is going to be transplanted and reused, and this is its original location. So I'm not sure why I can't zoom in on this. That is perplexing. But that's okay. So that's basically what we do. And here, there's a number of rhodos. Let me see, here's a shrub. So existing tree, sorry, there's a tree here, existing tree. So it's a cornice, and we're gonna transplant that. And this is its original location. Now here's another tree, Athuria plicata, which is a Western red cedar, and it is action is remove. So this particular job, there's quite a few existing plants, and we have placed those on the drawing. Now, the nice thing is with this, when we go to do our planting plan, sorry about that. It always seems like the phone rings when we're having a Q&A meeting. Let me just show you what we do when we are doing a planting plan. So I am going to stop that, and we'll share the other drawing. So here we've overlaid a planting plan with the rest of the drawing. You know, we've gone, in this case, we've done a water and an access and a soil layer. So here we are in the detail part of that. So we're getting into the actual planting plan, but you can see the existing plants here that we're leaving that are grayed out. And then you can see the new ones that are overlaid in here. So that is our approach with that. There's some details there, and then we often will provide details for how we would recommend planting these and any other sort of notes that are helpful. We use this endomycorrhizal fungi when we plant woody plants, and then some of these general conditions here. So I know we're not looking at planting plans today, but that is how we incorporate our existing trees and shrubs into our final drawing. Let's get back to our example here. There we go. All right. And then it gets interesting. With that same assignment, we're looking at microclimate attributes. So we list all of the microclimates, and then we give them, we put information into these various columns. So the sun, do we get sun in the summer and in the winter, and what the moisture is like seasonally, and the temperature and the wind, and what plants are there, and any features within it. So this is a really interesting approach to help you, really dial into these various microclimates. And this is part of getting to know your project site better, and the site analysis. It's a really big part of the picture. And when you're starting out in this process, it may take a little while, and it may actually take several visits to really get a good feel of all the microclimates on a site. If you can imagine, this happens to us quite a bit. You might get called a new client, you go out and you see them, maybe it's December, right? And you start your design in the new year, but you have to forecast a little bit how these various areas are going to look during the summer months. And one way you can do that is there's a fabulous app that we use on our phone called Sunseeker. And it has a 3D option, well, not option, or function to it. So we can basically hold up the phone and look around at the various parts of the landscape, and we get a path shown to us of the sun at whatever time of the year. And mainly what it's doing is it's showing us the winter, spring, summer, and fall solstice, and where those paths are in the sky. So if you're standing, for instance, a good example might be a client wants to place a vegetable garden or a greenhouse in their landscape, but they're not sure where the best spot would be. And you can, even if it's in December, you can walk around with this app and look up in the basically elevated into the sky, and you can pretty much tell how many hours of light these in various places are going to get. So that's a really handy tool for site analysis, and it's extremely inexpensive. I think it's like a $10 app or something. We use it quite a bit. We even use it on our own property when we're trying to determine the best, well, right now we're trying to determine the best possible place for a new greenhouse. So it has a lot of uses. And again, that sort of ties in with this section of the assignment. And then we got our SWOT analysis, which is always a very interesting thing to go through. And then you have some Q&A here that you can place your questions within. So let us go back. There we go, we're going back. So once you get through the assessment, the next step is the current zones. And again, that's very different. We're looking at the use of the site in terms of the human use, human pathways, whether those are on foot or bicycle or car. With an urban setting, it'll be very different to an acreage setting. But some important items that you want to include would be, where there's gates or doorways. Let's see here. And then, of course, those standard items that we want to see on all of your maps, where we have the title and your name and any pertinent information. So let's take a look at this example. And these, again, are current zones. And at the end of the design, when we are in lesson 9 and 10, in all likelihood, these may change a little bit. So that's at that point, we're asking you for the proposed new zones, but here we're really dialing into how the site is currently being used. And you can see here we have a zone 1 right around the habitat, and that's very typical even on this small acreage. Most of the activity is going to be in and around the house, and it may go out from it quite a bit. It's very interesting to see, especially in more agricultural settings, where this zone 1, it can be all over the place. So if you have animals, for instance, that you have to check on daily, it's a really good way of determining whether you've actually got some of that infrastructure placed in, optimally, because obviously you want to have everything as close as possible within reason to that center of activity, which of course is, in most cases, is the residence. So, and then we have zone 2 clearly laid out here, and 3 and 4 and 5. Now, Zone 5, this is where I see some misunderstanding with people, and I see zone 5s being placed that aren't actually zone 5. So zone 5s are an untouched area that, now here, this person has said annual harvest of small lumber and mulch, but technically you shouldn't be doing any maintenance there, right? Maybe you do grab a little bit of wood out of it if need be, but it's just left alone. And you can walk through it, you could visit it, but you're not managing it. So if you are managing it, the odds are it's more like a zone 4. And very rare to see zone 5 in an urban setting. There's not much untouched wilderness within the urban environment. In fact, a lot of urban settings, you may only have 3 zones. You may only have 2, depending on the size of the property. So don't think you have to get all zones onto your project site. They may not exist. And so yeah, not to worry about that. I don't think there's anything else. Here, there's some images showing each of those zones. That's great. That's very, very helpful. And then the SWOT analysis here. So there's 2 different maps within this section of, well, within this lesson. And they're both very important in my eyes in terms of the site analysis. This is all of these things we're doing right now, the sector compass, the microclimates, the zones, they're all part of that big picture site analysis. And then the next lesson is water. And then we're really, again, we're still in site analysis, but then we're starting to look at what we can do with some of those resources that we have. So let us go back here. Some of the assignments, resources, there's a microclimate plant ID chart here. And I noticed that Milo added a new discussion board today. It's called Plant ID Help and Discussion. So this is a great idea. So if you have plants that you have no idea what they are, this is the place to post them. And instructors and fellow classmates can jump in and help identify them. So I really appreciate Milo doing that. That's a great idea. So that about covers the assignment. Let's take a look at whether we have any questions here. Looks like Ruben has a question. Ruben, do you want to just unmute?
Yeah. So my question is, so if I like reading through the textbook for this class, there's, we're in the identification part. It's something about like, I don't remember the wording. It's like identify your keystone species. Mm-hmm. Is that, I'm looking more beyond the assignment. Like in this assignment, we're supposed to do 5, right? But in that, is the whole intent of that to identify the keystone in each, specific area, microclimate area, to just get that big picture idea? Or is it really just identify some to get used to plants in the area?
Yeah, I don't think we're really, you could do either one.
So like, I guess my question is like, should you focus on, let's say a plant that you have lots of in an area, or should you focus on the more dominant keystone type, does that make sense? They're rarer, but more dominant in the landscape.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's a priority over either one. The exercise is really to get students involved with identifying the different plants that might be within a landscape and to identify the microclimate that they're set within. And that is all part of that big picture with plant knowledge. If you prefer,
so that's the intent more, is the plant knowledge more so than so when you do this for a client, you wouldn't go in and just focus on them. You would just kind of generally like, these are the things here kind of thing.
No, when we are working for a client, we're going to identify significant trees and shrubs, and we're going to list perennials and herbaceous ground covers as well. And we do that, let's say that's on an urban setting, much like the example I showed you earlier. And we do that for two reasons. We're not trying to learn more about plants at this stage. Well, I shouldn't say that. You can always learn more. But what we're doing is we're checking in with that plant inventory. What is existing on this site that we could reuse, we can work around, or that is not working for the client or us at all, and that we're going to remove. So it's critical for us to know in order to get to that final step of a planting plan being created. But there are a number of good outcomes with this. So let's say we are on an acreage setting and we have, 5 acres of Douglas fir forest. Odds are we're not going to be doing anything to manage that, and we'll identify those, but not in the same way. They'll be just very broad, sort of much like some of the base plans may be with showing large groups of trees or forest. But we're not, again, this is really more to dial into the ID. And not only that, is culturally what the plants want. So if you were to use that plant in a landscape, where's the best place to put it? And some of that is observing where it is in your project site. And, we could take this to the next level and, okay, let's say you have a rhododendron in your project site, and it's in this particular microclimate, maybe it's in a partial shade microclimate. What condition is it in? Does it look happy? Is it looking like it's thriving? Does it look really unhappy? Those actually help you determine, whether you would add more perhaps to that area and making a larger group, or whether that's just really inappropriate for the microclimate. So it's there's so many potential plants out there. It literally takes years to learn them by sight. And not only that, in the middle of winter, they look completely different. So knowing them throughout the year and knowing what they, the sort of microclimates are going to do well in. Because that's the other thing, when you start to plan a planting plan, you want to be confident that what you're putting in there is going to do well. If you make a little error and things, you're putting shade lovers in the sun, well, that's certainly one way to learn, and good if you're doing that at home, but not so good if it's a client. So
along that line, like when you're moving plants, like say, for example, rhododendrons. In my area, rhoda is such a broad category. You could go anywhere from partial sun to full sun. You could go anywhere from 4 feet tall to 15 feet tall, right? So like you talk about rhododendron, there could fit pretty much any microclimate depending on the type. How much effort do you put into identifying when you try to move something, right? To say rhoda, that's not really, it's like it could be all kinds of, how do you do that? Or do you not, you just assume?
Well, I actually spent a lot of time early in my career around rhododendrons. If I know what they are, I will identify them specifically, but quite often we're viewing them when they're not in flower. And because of the vast array of hybrids, it may be difficult to determine exactly what it is. So if I know what it is, I'll certainly make note of it. But if not, and be honest, I do not, the number of rhododendrons I've planted in new landscapes in the last 2 decades, not very many at all. I do not lean towards them heavily. I've had clients say, well, I want to do a rhododendron garden here. And yes, we've done those like woodland gardens, but typically I steer away from them. I use other items. We have, in this part of the world, I feel we have so much evergreen content to begin with our forests that I feel that, you know, a lot of deciduous elements within the landscape really will pop. They'll really jump out, and they're very effective. Saying that, you do want to have a mixture so you have structure during the winter. So but getting back to your question, I don't dive too deep into the specific identification unless I know it. Because be honest, when we get pulled into a new if somebody calls us to come and redesign or renovate their existing landscape and their garden is full of plants, the odds are that that's not working for them. So we're going to be removing some items, and it's usually people are not happy because they have about one of this and one of that, and there's no unity. So that's part of our site analysis, is looking what is in the landscape that has potential to build on. So maybe they have a lovely Cornus mass, a Cornelian cherry, and they have enough room where we could plant more of those around the landscape to try and unify it. So that's kind of where we're heading when we look at an existing landscape that's been fully planted out. If we're in an existing landscape that just has a few items, the same thing, we'll try and build on what's there and specifically ask the client, do you like this? And they may go, nope, I don't care. Or they may have a strong attachment to it. And that's good information to figure out, because you may decide to remove something they absolutely love, and you don't want to do that if it's possible. So I see there's a couple of items in the chat here. So Sean, give it a number, then give it an action. So with the software we're using, Sean, that number is generated within our existing plant symbols, and we can then produce a worksheet showing all of the existing plants. And I've had a couple of projects that they almost become a nightmare trying to document existing plant material. We had one a few years ago it's probably an acre. It was fully landscaped. There were hundreds of existing plants, and our client wanted to ensure that we had documented every single one of them. So it was quite painful going through, but it is important as well. So I'm not sure if that helps you out, Sean.
Well, I was commenting on Ruben's question, but that does help quite a bit. And where does the line between permaculture design and landscape architecture start and end?
Yeah, that's a good question. I
kind of hinted at, you could have a client who wants landscape architecture when you're actually bigger picture.
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, that's an excellent question. There are so many. Well, here's a partial answer. If you Google permaculture garden and you look at all the images, my God, there are just everything, right? From a wild, low maintenance garden nobody's maintaining, it's just complete chaos, right, to something that's very highly maintained, right? And you could all label them as ecological. Like, we call our work regenerative, because when we go in, we're restoring and improving the soils and the ecological footprint, all sorts of different things that we're trying to improve. And often we'll be mixing ornamentals in with medicinals and edibles? So it's a very good question. I think everybody's answer is going to be a little bit different because you're going to have a leaning. Some people lean heavily towards edible landscapes, and that's what they want to see in the work they do primarily. They want to help feed their clientele. You know, Hatchet and Seed, and if you Google them, Hatchet and Seed in Victoria, they are a wonderful small business that does amazing work on Vancouver Island here, and they're really dialed into edible landscapes, building annual vegetable gardens, greenhouses, you know, perennial edibles. Fantastic work. Their work is quite different aesthetically to what my wife and myself do, but we could both say they're, you know, we're trying to do the same things. We're trying to increase biodiversity, increase soil health, make the landscape have a positive impact on the environment rather than imposing our will. And I guess we're always imposing our will at some level, but for instance, right now, the job we're on, we're, you know, basically at the beginning of a job, there's a lot of destruction. It's quite painful. It really is. And, but we have the end goal in mind. And when we get there, we know that it's going to be way better in terms of the ecology than when we started. I'm not sure I answered your question, but it's going to be very, very individual. So for me, I had a strong parks maintenance background. I shifted into design and build, and then I went into commercial bidding and management, and then back into ecological regenerative. So I've done all kinds of stuff. And I was heavily influenced on the architectural side by 2.5 years I spent bidding and managing commercial jobs because I saw, you know, 5 or 6 drawings a week that I was bidding on, and that really got, you know, I love maps and I love the visual of a well put together design, but you know, I don't know if that helps, John, but it is a little mysterious.
No, that helped perfectly. I guess, you know, it's for every client out there, there's the right fit of a design firm as well. So if you get somebody who wants landscape design, I'm super technical plant ID, then you could say, maybe this is you, maybe it's not. That's not the best fit for me, but talk to Hatchet and Seed or vice versa. So we, you know, we're a community of designers, and we know our strengths and weaknesses based on what we like to do within reason, and then also what the client needs. So just starting out, I have to simmer things down to what my capabilities are, and focus on big picture concepts, you know, as I drill down on more technique and honing the craft. So that's just, you know, my feedback.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I think eventually what happens after you have, and I would say this happens more when you're in the field doing the work, and that's one of the keys to being, I think, I won't say a good designer. That's kind of judgmental, but by being an effective designer is not only being able to articulate it on paper, but being able to build it. Right.
Yeah. So, well, in commercial interiors, I have some experience there. It's the same thing with folks who can come out on site and see their vision coming to reality versus the ones who are very removed from the site and never see their work coming into fruition.
Yeah, that's quite right. So if you get experience in both of those fields, they both get better, right? When you're designing, you know what you can do, you know what you can't do, or at least you know if you go down a certain pathway, when you get to the construction end of it, boy, that's going to be hard. You know, we're fighting against something here. So, yeah, and we get jobs like that where we are having to push a little bit, but it gets easier. I mean, I find now the installs that we're involved with, they're you know, they're pretty straightforward. There's curveballs every day, but really they're, you know, I'm comfortable. I've done so many. It gets more and more comforting. When I first started, oh my God, it was very stressful. It required complete absorption into the project. So that's all I was thinking about. And probably wasn't the best person to be around at that time, you know, but it's what I had to do to make it work. I had to put a lot of energy into the execution. And, you know, that's something we don't cover in this course, but, you know, taking a design and then pricing it and that whole process, that's very interesting because you're having to break down every step. You have to visualize what are you going to do that day, all the different steps. You have to guess how long it's going to take you. You have to project as well as you can the materials you're going to need, and you know, how risky is that? There's all sorts of factors that go into it. But
is there a resource available through OSU or another university that offers that business, you know, say that finance component specifically, or is that more just along the lines of what a general contractor would be adhering to, the bidding template, so to speak?
Well, that's a real good question. I'm going to grab a book here, 2 seconds, and I'll show you the cover of it. Hold on.
The book, I love it. The old books.
So this is an incredible book.
I think I've seen
the Complete Estimating Book. Now the author, Vanderkoo and Associates. Charles is his first name. I use this book even today. Well, not literally today, but what I use in here is primarily like production rates. So if I'm putting together a bid, you know, and for instance, I'm doing some irrigation and I'm putting in a backflow preventer, you know, it's telling me here, if I'm going really slow, it'll be 2 hours. And if I'm fast, it'll be 1.5 hours. And these, you know, the production rates are very, very helpful for putting together bids. That's not really answering your question.
Well, that's terrific. That's honestly, that is like some sort of industry standard baseline from which to work so that I'm not completely blowing smoke when I start to interface with folks who have an interest in this kind of stuff.
Sure. Well, that's only part of the picture. This book gets into, this book is based on what's called overhead recovery system. So most landscape people, in my experience, if they go to bid a job, they'll think, oh, okay, here's my costs to do it. And I'm going to add, say, 20% profit. That's what I want, right? Whatever the percentage is. And they go do the job and they're paid. And then it just doesn't jive with their bank account. Like, wow, I did this $100,000 job and I should have $20,000 and I got 10. What is going on? And I started working for the largest firm on the island, doing these commercial projects, and their system was just that. It was not looking at their overhead. So we use the overhead recovery system, and I won't go into it today. it's actually something we may, there's another instructor, Javin Bernakovich, and we've been talking about doing a mentorship training with people after this course. So that's something we may do, because I can see, once the course is done, you have a lot of tools, but there's a lot of tools you don't have. And some of those are specifically business related, like how do I bid a job? Like how should I start? And I
Or if you end up bidding a job, but then getting so burned out and losing so much money or time that you are thwarted from pursuing the next opportunity because of that sour experience. So we don't want to take young designers and then drive them into the ground. Or mentoring is a great term, if you know how to connect with or mentor intern locally. But I like that idea. If you and Javin did something like that, I'd be interested just to so as I'm at farmers markets and people are coming up to me and, well, how much would you charge? And I don't have the slightest clue what number to throw out there or how to do it. And again, based on what you said with the software we're using, the limitations, we're not professional designers. We're just getting our feet wet, but I'd be very interested in learning a little bit more so as to come at it with integrity and confidence when interacting with new prospects.
Well, that's a really good attitude, and it's a smart way to approach it. I'll have to talk to Javin, and we'll see where we can go with this. There's just been so many things going on in my household. My father's in palliative care at home here, and that's been a bit distracting.
Yeah, the time consuming on that is probably unquantifiable.
It's really, I wasn't sure I'd be even able to do any installations this year, but we've been able to work a system at home here where I can be out of here for 4 days a week. And but yes, I would like to see what kind of interest there is. And that's how Javin and myself were going to start. We're just going to host a free meeting, see who's interested, do sort of an overview of some of the things we could provide. And, the one big one is actually how to estimate and how to figure out what your overhead is and how to cover that. Because really, if you want to make profit, it's going to have to be on top of your overhead. So you have to try and account for that. And it takes a little bit of work, but it worked out really well for the company I worked for. I was a hero for 2.5 years there until one job didn't go so well. And then I wasn't a hero, but I was ready to leave anyhow. So so stay tuned with that one. I'm pretty sure we will be doing something, just haven't been able to pull it all together quite yet. And Javin has a very busy educational end of his business, so we'll find time, both of us, and we'll get back to you on that, Sean.
Yeah, well, my wife's 2 weeks past due with our second baby, so I can relate to a shortage of time is what we do around here. So we're all on eggshells, but yeah, you put the intent out there, and I appreciate it, and the lessons, and Javin as well has been great with his videos. So thank you.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. Let me just go through a couple other questions here or items in the chat. Ruben, like how you labeled, they were labeled with this example. I guess, Ruben, you're talking about
both of those occurred when you were showing yours, where you had like the one dash, existing landscape / remove,
Yeah, labeling's a biggie, and I'm always trying to make drawings as clear as possible. And that's half of the job, right? Is coming up with an idea, but then articulating it on paper so that it's understandable to the client. So somebody should be able, my goal, somebody should be able to look at a drawing and not need me to describe things to them, right? They should be able to get it. So That's not easy always, but does that answer your question, Ruben?
Yes. It was more of a comment, but yes.
Okay. And Sean, you had one more comment question here. Okay, help me focus on what plants are in each zone, and then what action. So the action is an important part of it. That's not something we ask for in the course, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind. Okay, this is our existing landscape. What is there anything here I just don't want within it that I want to remove for whatever reason, or maybe relocate? So obviously, if you have a large Douglas fir tree, you're not going to relocate that. You might have to remove it if for some reason it's not in an ideal spot. Although I must say, with every year that goes by, I cringe every time I have to remove things because I'm trying to certainly retain as many trees as possible. Okay, or could be based on preference, yeah, and long-term goal. Absolutely. So they become part of the big picture. And if you're really lucky with existing landscapes, you'll see, you'll get to a point where you can see some of those assets and go, aha, that's an excellent plant. And we're going to build on that. Maybe we'll repeat it. And that's half of it. And that's maybe where, just relating to your earlier question, Sean, where difference between architecture, landscape architecture, and permaculture is in permaculture, there's an emphasis on, let's say, on diversity within the landscape. And there's not any emphasis really put on aesthetics, right? But the reality is any client you have, if they're investing in their landscape, they want it to look good. And part of it looking good is following some of those strategies that landscape architects use. So unity is one of them. That's probably the biggest thing that we see that do-it-yourselfers will they're not aware of. So we will, when we plant or when we plan a landscape, some of those foundational plants, we want to try and repeat those as much as possible, so that they may go all the way around a house. They may be part of everything. So when you're going from one area to another, you have this common thread, and then you have more unique individual items. So you can have a lot of diversity, but if you have some anchor the landscape, then it won't look distracting. So if you look at the forest, like I just look out at my forest out here, there's only 4 or 5 different species of trees out there, and they've all have a very calming effect. And that's part of it. That's part of what unity will bring, is a sense of calm. But again, that's not emphasized in permaculture. That's really left up to the individual. But I would say if you're working for others, that is something you'd want to try and consider when you're putting together any plantings, is how can you make this look good? And by doing that, instead of 20 individual plants, maybe you want 7, but you want to repeat those items. And certainly where I live and work, we have so much deer pressure. We're pretty much forced to go down that road because we have more of a limited selection of plants to pull on. So we'll want more numbers, right? Okay. Well, we're at 5 after, but what I'd like to do, is there any other questions anybody has right now? Because what I'll do, if there are no questions, I better make sure there are none on the sheet here. We'll take a look at that again. So there was, it's more of a comment, I think, here.
Those were there, and I think those look more like someone accidentally typed there instead of on their report.
Yeah, and then this wasn't yours here, Ruben, was it? I think this
No,
was...
that was there before. So I think
Right.
someone just used the wrong spot.
I think this is more of a comment on their site analysis. So they really feel that there is some great potential in their landscape. And, you know, I can't remember the student's name, but I know he is down in Ashland, so it's quite a dry, hot climate there. And they have a pond on site. So I don't think that's really a question. Okay. So maybe what I'll do, if everybody's up to it, I'll just show you a couple pictures of what we're up to on this current project. Okay, I'll just sort of fly through them here. So here we are. I don't think it was sharing. There we go. All right. So this is just a small urban landscape with a park behind it. So it feels massive, but it isn't. And we'll see if we can. So first thing we had to do was strip turf. And I tried to figure out another way of doing this, but there wasn't. What we wanted to do was create a planting area on the slope and then retain it at the bottom. So we could cut the percentage of slope here. And we brought in some rock, and I got lots of content here for social media. So there's some of this stuff's not worth, but here I'll run this. There was, we got about 20 tons of blasted stone. So where I live, you know, Vancouver Island is a lot of rock here, and it can be quite a useful building material. So this is very easy to get, and I think it was I don't know, $35 a ton or something. It's not horribly expensive. There we go. So we just place that along the toe of the slope. Not sure why those are smaller. And that's kind of what we ended up with. So what I did here is I make sure the bottom of the rock is below finished grade, because nobody wants to look at the bottom of a rock. And some of that turf we peeled off, I reapplied, and we flipped it upside down. And then we plumbed in all of our irrigation. It's not shown flipped upside down here, but I do this to keep as much soil life as possible within the area. But we had to have it empty. Yeah, this is our rain garden. And this is the flat middle section of it. And this is sort of, so this is actually a zone 1, and this is zone 2, and then that's zone 3, nothing to do with the zones we've been talking about. But this is a wet area, and the sides are a little less wet. Those won't have any meaning, but you can see here, we've got a future lawn area between the upper area and this rain garden. The rain garden's under construction, and we happen to run into, this is the main line for the irrigation. So this supplies all the water to the garden in the rear of the property, and unfortunately it was going right through the middle of the rain garden, so we had to terminate it. We had to cut it and pull it out and then reinstall it. And then as we're flattening the bottom section here, I'm just painting the elevation that we want to maintain for the operator. And you can see here, we had nice friable soil until we hit the bottom couple inches where we had clay, and that's the worst thing you could have for a rain garden. So what we did is we just carved this little channel down the very middle of it. Not very deep, about 3 or 4 inches. And we stuck a perforated pipe there with a clean out at this end. And this drain comes around the corner into a sliding gate valve, and then it goes to the ditch. So during the winter months, I know this is not going to be infiltrating and could be quite messy, right? It could not turn out well. So we would just open that sliding gate valve and relieve the water pressure in here during the winter. And then at this time of year, we could close it, and we'll get infiltration in the sides, but we're not going to get it in the bottom, which is too bad. And the whole idea here is then that's our main line that we're reconnecting. We basically place some drain rock within that on top of the perforated pipe. Pretty easy. We have our irrigation line beside us. And then we put fabric over it because I don't want that, the integrity of that drain rock to be affected. And this is our clean out. So if we ever have to, we can unscrew the cap and clean that drain line quite easily. So that's kind of what it looks from the road. Looks still a little bit of a disaster. We put more fabric here before we started putting topsoil in. So we ended up, this is a great tool if you guys are ever doing any backfill and you're close to the road. You can get a slinger truck in there. It just shoots the soil where you want it to go. You got about 60, 70 foot range. So very, very helpful. Saves a ton of work. And you can see the turf was flipped over for the most part. So we're just building on top of that. And we have all our irrigation in place around the perimeter. These are all 12-inch pop-ups. So they pop up 12 inches and then spray. And on the downhill side, we put some landscape fabric to basically fill the voids between the rocks, because we know with blasted rock, you're going to get voids and we're going to have a lot of soil movement, and we didn't want that. And we got enough in there. Let me see what else. So that's kind of where the rain garden looks right now. So there's more than a foot of soil there at the bottom. So that's our zone 1. So we have water that will come off the roof and the patios on the back of the property. And they're going to come in this side of the rain garden. We're going to have an inlet here, and we have an inlet over on this side from the other side of the property. But we are not, we're putting the infrastructure in for this and connecting later. But this side will be active, so we'll still get good flows. And we have a pooling height of about 6 inches. So we'll get 6 inches of water in there, and it could potentially pool to 6. And then we have a catch basin that will handle any overflow. So once we go out beyond 6, boom, it's draining. And then we'll have an emergency passive drain an inch or 2 above that. So if for some reason this got clogged and nobody was aware of it, it will head overland here and into a ditch. We're very lucky. We have a roadside ditch right here. It's just completely ideal. And that's about it. So just a couple of fun images, but it's hard to put it in context. If we actually just go, you know what I should do, just to give you a little bit of context before we call it a day here. We'll go to the same landscape during construction of the back here. I'm just going to really quickly go through these. This is a retaining wall and paver patio that we had installed. Just trying to get a before on here. That's what it used to look like. So it was all rotted railway tie and all this existing concrete. So we had to remove all that. And it turned out quite well. A lot of hardscape here, but this is what you end up having to deal with, Sean, when you're trying to create outdoor living spaces for people. And they have certain, you know, they wanted a long-term safe retaining wall. There's an existing filbert we saved. And then we planted that up. Now let me get to lots of destruction, as you can see. Sorry for flying through here. That's when the pavers were going down and the wall being put up. Let me just get to the soft landscape. Then we built an enclosed veggie garden. And here's a little narrow planting here. And then some of the, so there you go. There's a mixture of ornamentals. So we have walking onion here. Walking onion, we got asparagus, we got ornamental grasses. So a combination of plantings here. So it turned out really well. This is the first season, right? So you can have a huge bang for your buck within a few months. And that is all about, for us, putting in, you know, good soil, good compost, and this has all got micro irrigation. So the irrigation, I think I have a few images of the irrigation here, but that is another part that we do not cover in this class that is, you know, pretty vital for, there you go. So this is an example of what we did in these narrow beds where we run poly pipe and we have these what's called pop-up micros. And we put, not sure if we have one shown here. We put what's called very nozzles on them. Yeah, I'm not sure where those images are. They're here somewhere, and we had, let's see, we had to cut across the driveway and put sleeves to route all the irrigation under. And there's our backflow. You know, it's pretty extensive stuff. We have to tie into the potable system and then put a main shutoff, a winterizing valve, and then a backflow preventer to protect the water service. And then we use HDPE piping, water service piping, and then bed it in sand and put bits where we want future access. Let's see, I know I've got some. Yeah, it's hard to keep track of all my photos, but just trying to look at the very nozzle. Oh, here's a good one. So here's a mistake. So Christmas, we're having a Christmas break. That first phase of work, which was just the wall and the patio, there was no planting at that point. It got put in, we go into winter, we're having our Christmas break, we get a call, oh my God, there's all this water everywhere. And the client is naturally freaking out. What is going on here, right? So we dug up all the sleeves that were, that's one part of this, is we have conduits going under between the beds so we can get irrigation there. And it turned out, look at all the water floating right over this patio, heading right to the garage, right? It's not typically what we would want to see. So there was a major problem here, and it was caused by a mistake on the mason's part. So he had to pull the wall down. What happened is they put this wall up, and he has a number of people working with him, and somebody rushed the drainage. So if you're ever doing drainage, take your time. This person rushed it, and it was not, didn't have slope going to the end. It kind of came up in a peak. So all that groundwater had nowhere to go. And it ended up running. So he had to rip some of these pavers out, as well as the back of the wall. I don't know if I have any pictures of those. Quite a bit of work to fix. And then because of the high groundwater, we decided to put these raised planters in. And at the bottom of the planters is drain rock, perforated pipe, fabric. So any water coming up goes into these drainage beside the drainage that's at the back of the wall. These planters have drainage underneath them that picks up water and sends it off site. So this winter was great. So that's kind of the beginning. And you can imagine, it's pretty ugly when you're at the beginning and very destructive. But I won't go on anymore. But things happen. And yeah, that was a first for us with this particular mason. I've worked with him for over 2 decades, and that was the first time he'd ever dropped the ball. But he fixed it, and it looks great. Looks great, and there's no problems with it right now. But fortunately, we didn't have any plants in place. That would have been rather disastrous. Everything would have floated away. So anyhow, I thought that might be interesting to take a peek at. And I guess we are over time here, so I should probably terminate the call unless there's any questions anybody has. And
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Wish you the best of luck with your
very good
upcoming assignments. And every time we do have a Q&A here, I will try and flip in some project related images just to, it's kind of fun to share what we're doing, and it may be helpful just to see what we're up to, what potentially you could do, and yeah, go from there, and aligning yourself with some really good professionals. So like the fellow on that excavator we'd worked with for over 20 years, and it's I used to run an excavator myself, but I do not like doing that, so I'd rather have somebody else do it, and don't want to be purchasing machinery anymore. We used to have it, but not good for the overhead. So anyhow, thank you very much, everybody, for all your time today, and have a great week. We'll look forward to seeing your assignments next week, and don't hesitate to pop me any questions if they come up as you're putting together your assignment, and We'll see you on the next Q&A in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. See you
Okay.
later.
Thank you so much.
Okay, you take care.